Hey folks, I'm back with round 4 from my recent experience at the World Open. In this round, I was playing against, I believe, a national master, Eigen Wang. It was around 2,200 FIDE, and I wasn't exactly sure what to expect for this game. Again, there actually wasn't a lot of time to prepare for any of the rounds in the World Open. At best, the pairings would go up like 15 minutes before the round, so really not a lot of time to prep. After some thought, I decided to play one knight f3, and I've been doing this recently against a lot of players when I'm not exactly sure what I want to do in the opening, but I'd rather go for this e3 system where I'm often playing an early b3, bishop b2, and being very flexible and just seeing how what kind of setup my opponent chooses. So in this game, Black played c5, and this is an interesting move because it's also inviting the Sicilian, which I could definitely go for and consider during the game. But I decided to stick with the game plan. I just played e3 here. Black played knight f6, d4, and he plays e6, and I decided to play b3. So my opponent here plays it in a really interesting way because he actually delays the move d7, d5. In fact, he doesn't even play it in the game. And his point is that, well, Black simply has no need for this move. Instead, he wants to play b6 and bishop b7 and just get all of his pieces developed and have a very, very flexible setup. In fact, he's essentially using a similar strategy to what I'm doing, just developing in this classic style, and yeah, being I think a very, very solid way of developing here for Black. So b6 was played. I played bishop b2, bishop b7, bishop d3, bishop e7, castles, castles. I thought all of this was very, very standard. I chose to play knight bd2 here, knight c6, a3. I'm not sure if this move is 100% necessary, but I wanted to just avoid any kind of knight before ideas. Black played rook to c8, and I chose to move queen e2 here. I guess White could also play the move c4, but as we'll see, this was a move that I basically just wanted to avoid playing as much as I could. I figured after c4, which is a very natural move, the problem is that it just gives Black a very easy game after c takes d4, e takes d4, and the move d5. Now this is definitely a matter of opinion and perspective, but I personally don't love these positions from the point of view of the hanging pawns. Because I'm not going to take on d5 here. I think this would give Black just an excellent version of playing against the IQP, but instead I'm just going to keep the tension, and I just feel like one day when Black takes on c4 and I take back with the pawn, I don't really want to play the hanging pawn structure. In fact, a lot of times I'd rather play against them. So c4 is definitely a possibility, but it didn't exactly lead to the position I wanted to play, so I decided to simply play the move queen e2 and keep everything flexible. Also, maybe potentially think about pushing e4 one day, but it really depends on how Black decides to play. So if Black did play d5 themselves, then I think one idea would be to try to play knight e5 for White, and if allowed, to establish this kind of stonewall setup, or the Pillsbury attack with f4, knight f3, and so on. And I think White would have a really, really comfortable development. Instead, Black played rook e8, and I think my opponent actually played it really smart because he doesn't commit to d5, he leaves his bishop on b7 open and a very good piece, and he can still put the pawn on d6 and cover the e5 square, which a lot of times White is kind of trying to use as like a springboard for the attack. So I continued to keep it flexible, rook a1, and here my opponent decided to take on d4, e takes d4, and bishop f8. So continuing to be super flexible, Black is not playing d5 and allowing White to play knight e5. I think this would be already very comfortable for me, especially since I haven't played c4 and I haven't given Black this target, meaning Black is going to have a hard time finding counterplay in this position. Instead, he goes bishop f8, which I think is a very good and flexible move. I played rook fe1, d6, and yeah, here I was really trying hard to figure out what to do because it's clear that White has completed the development, but Now it's time to actually find a plan and plan for attack and try to figure out how I'm going to try to play for an advantage here. Once again, I thought about c4, but I figured if I play it here, it doesn't matter that black already spent the tempo on d6. He'll probably just play d5 anyway. And here black just gets a clear target again with the hanging pawns. He can play g6 and bishop g7 soon too. And I think black's position is just extremely comfortable. So again, I wanted to avoid playing c4. I ended up playing kind of one of the only plans I could find, knight f1. And the idea behind this move is to try to play knight to e3 and, well, bring the knight a little bit closer to the center and the king side and maybe try to use this knight more actively in the future. So after some thought, my opponent here played g6. Definitely a very useful move, bringing the bishop to g7. So knight e3, bishop g7. And yeah, here I started feeling very dissatisfied with my position because I just felt like I don't really have a clear plan. I don't have any serious targets. My opponent's king is now actually very safe with the bishop covering it from the fianchetto. Again, c4 is going to be met with d5 pretty soon, so I didn't really want to go into this unless I absolutely had to. But I also felt like if I don't do anything, then, okay, number one, it's going to be hard to win the game. But number two, I mean, black is ready to play queen c7 and maybe even break with e5, which, if I'm not careful, could be very unpleasant one day. So not only do I have to think about trying to get an advantage, I also have to make sure that I'm not going to fall into a worse position just by drifting. So I spent a lot of time here trying to figure out what to do. Eventually I settled on the move h3. Not exactly sure if this was the right move, but it was the best I could find. Basically just a micro improvement, taking control over the g4 square, kind of passing the move to see what my opponent is going to do. And I think this actually ends up working out. Black ends up playing here knight h5, which is a perfectly reasonable move, but it does kind of signify some ambitious intention, so maybe my move h3 was a little bit provocative. I decided to play g3. Not really a move I was happy to make, to be honest, because opening up the diagonal against this bishop is always unpleasant. But I didn't really see such a better option with the knight about to jump to f4, and that seemed really annoying. That said, after g3, I didn't really see a concrete way for black to really exploit this, so I thought it was still okay. He played queen c7. I think it's a very reasonable move. I decided to play h4. Now, given the chance, I might play something like knight to g5, and the knight isn't necessarily going to be threatening much from there, but at least I can pretend to have some activity and, I don't know, maybe try to bring the knight somewhere better. Here I think the best move for black was the move knight e7, which I remember thinking about during the game, but I'm not sure if I was quite estimating it, because it's actually a very, very strong move, simply opening up the c6 square for the queen, and now black's queen and bishop can create this super dangerous battery on the diagonal, and yeah, it would be hard for white to defend this point. I think I'm going to have to play king g2 soon, just kind of walking into this pin, and black's not exactly winning or anything, but it actually does feel a little bit unpleasant. So had my opponent found this, I think I would have had I think I would have started suffering quite a bit in this game, because it's clear that black is just getting some pressure in the position. Instead, black played the move queen to b8, which maybe is a little bit slow. I believe the idea was to put the queen on a8 and kind of set up this battery anyway. But yeah, it's going to take another move to get there, and then the knight will still have to get out of the way, and then objectively the battery will not be as strong with the bishop kind of in front. So I decided to play knight to g5, and now with this move I did have to calculate a couple lines here to kind of justify it, because the d4 pawn is hanging. And there wasn't any kind of huge intention with this move. I might be threatening a potential knight takes h7, king takes, and queen takes h5, which is definitely in the position, but I think this move was more of a practical choice, just trying to well, provoke my opponent into maybe creating some weaknesses. I was thinking about the move h6, after which I was already considering to sacrifice on f7, which I think is interesting. The engine actually does suggest that white has a very decent attack there, but I'm not sure if during the game I would have exactly evaluated it correctly. Going back to some other lines, if black had played like bishop takes d4, for example, then my idea was to take on g6, and black has to recapture. I take on d4, takes, rook takes, and yeah, I think this position is about equal, but at least there's something to play for. Black's king side has been weakened a bit, and yeah, there's certainly some imbalance in the position, so I felt like this would at least be reasonable. Black could also take with the knight, but it kind of leads to the same thing after takes takes and bishop takes g6, hg, rook takes d4, and we have the same position. Okay, in the game my opponent decided to play knight f6. I think this was a solid move. Then I think I found a very good move here, knight to g4. I mean, I actually still didn't really like my position here. I played this move somewhat out of necessity because I just couldn't really find another idea. The main point is just to try to trade off one of black's defenders on the king side, and if I can trade this knight off, then black's king side might be a little bit more vulnerable. I think I was mainly expecting knight takes g4 here, and then after queen takes g4. I don't know, I felt like actually white's position is kind of freed up a little bit. I have ideas of playing h5, which would be nice. If black plays h5 themselves, then maybe white drops back. And, well, I think white is probably slightly better here. It's not so easy for black to play. The knight on g5 is now a pretty good piece. I have some pressure against this pawn chain, like f7, g6. And who knows, maybe there's going to be some d5 tactics at some point, or something that white can try to set up. In the game, I feel like black actually had a couple of reasonable moves here, but my opponent ends up making a very serious mistake with the move h6. And now this would be a good time to pause the video if you want a nice calculation exercise and try to figure out what white should do here. I actually found there's actually two right ideas, and I found both of them, but I don't think I realized that one was actually as good as it really is. So I ended up taking on f6 here with the intention after bishop takes f6 to sacrifice on f7, which is winning, and I actually did manage to fully calculate this one correctly. But much easier actually back here was just the move queen to f3, which I also noticed had a lot of potential, but at this point I was actually already kind of inching closer towards time trouble. I think this is around move 20, and I had like maybe half an hour left for the next 20 moves, so it wasn't a lot of time for 20 moves in a about to be very complicated middle game. So I didn't spend that much time on this one. I noticed that it's potentially very strong because knight takes g4 here runs into queen takes f7, and then I take on g6, and well, white just has too many threats here, and black's king is in huge trouble, so white is just winning. After queen f3, the main thing I thought would happen was h takes g5, knight takes f6, takes, queen takes f6, and I realized this position would be dangerous for black. I mean, white has the potential battery on the dark squares. I mean, d5 is a huge threat in this position, but somehow I just didn't fully evaluate it as like totally winning for white. I thought maybe white is better, but it's not that much. For example, black plays a move like d5, and what exactly can white do with the dark squared bishop here? But I simply just didn't evaluate this position further enough. I mean, number one, okay, we have this move bishop c1, which I think is not that hard to find, that looks really strong and shows the power of the dark square bishop. And here I think black is just in huge trouble and maybe just getting mated. And even the very simple move h takes g5 is actually really strong here, followed by king g2 and rook h1 with a simple mating attack. Bishop takes g6 sacrifices are looming as well. And so yeah, I think this would have just given white a completely winning position, but without risking anything by having not sacrificed any material. In fact, I think white is just a pawn up here. So I feel like had I thought a little bit longer, I would have realized that this is actually a much simpler move to gain a huge advantage. But okay, I had already seen that the sacrifice would be really tempting and potentially winning, so at a certain point I just decided to stop calculating and go for it. So I took on f7, king takes f7, and here my idea was to play queen g4. Now queen takes g6 is a really serious threat, and the main point is that black just has no way of defending this pawn without dropping the e6 pawn. So rook g8, this would allow either queen takes e6, or I think in the game I was really eyeing the move rook takes e6 here, where I think white just has a really strong attack. We have a piece for 2 pawns. We have the second rook coming in with brick de1 soon. We have ideas of playing rook takes f6 check and then d5. We have also bishop c4 moves. And basically I think black is just not surviving this one. G6 is also a huge target. I have ideas just to play h5 and open up the light squares, and as well as queen f3 and just targeting this bishop on f6. So quite a number of threats here from white's point of view, and yeah, I think this position is just lost for black. In the game, instead, my opponent decided to play the move knight e7, which I think is probably the best try. And again, I decided to take with the rook on e6. It feels a little counterintuitive. I think most players instinctively would want to take with the queen because we're giving a check and we're gaining that tempo. But after takes and king g7, I couldn't really find such a convincing way forward here, so I realized from afar that rook takes e6 was actually going to be potentially a stronger idea. And the main reason for this is that with rook takes e6, white is able to just keep building the attack a lot more effectively than with the queen on e6 and both rooks on the back rank. So here I can double on the e file. Once again, I'm threatening rook takes f6 check followed by d5, which is actually leading to mate. And yeah, I don't think black has a really great defense anymore. I think white's attack is just way too strong. So in the game, black played bishop d5, which I think was definitely the critical defense. After a move like d5, which was another way of blocking white's bishop, something like rook de1 would probably happen, and I think black's position is just kind of busted. I have threats of queen f3, the bishop can come back in via c1, g6 is still kind of hanging. So we have ideas of rook takes e7, for example, rook takes e7, queen takes g6 check, and then the bishop is going to hang with check, and white is just going to have too many pieces around black's king. Instead, bishop d5 was played, and if not for the next resource, then I don't think the sacrifice would be working. So I actually had to find this one before I sacrificed on f7, and that was the move rook takes f6 check. So this wasn't too hard to find because, as we've seen, like this idea was already popping up in different lines, so it's quite thematic for this position. Here the nice point is that after king takes f6, white is a full rook down, but we can play the move c4, and now black has to deal with a very difficult choice. If the bishop moves away, then white is going to get d5 in, and that is simply just going to lead to mate. So for example, bishop basically anywhere, white goes d5 check, king f7, queen e6, and queen f6 and queen g7 mate. So this is a pretty important mating pattern because it basically works in a lot of lines, and so black basically just can't afford to allow white to get this discovered attack, and the bishop has to stay on d5, and white is going to be able to take one piece back. Now it doesn't feel like things are that clear yet. For example, after queen b7, this was played in the game, white is getting a piece back, but is still going to be down the exchange. But now white is really not down that much material. We have two bishops after c takes d5, queen takes d5, which was kind of forced because otherwise queen e6 check would be pretty annoying. So after takes and queen takes d5, we do have a pawn for the exchange, but more importantly, white's two bishops are able to just activate immediately. So bishop c4 is an important move. Queen f5 was played. And now, if not for d5 check, king f7, and queen d4, white would actually not be winning this position. Because without this resource, white would almost be forced to trade queens. I think queen e2 is possible here, but then I believe it runs into knight d5, and then black kind of gets a nice blockade. So d5 check is very important, and then after queen d4, white is keeping a huge initiative, and now the power of the two bishops is certainly being felt. Especially on the dark squares. Okay, queen g7 is a huge threat. Black has to play rook to g8, and we can kind of stop and evaluate the position here. because black's pieces are just extremely passive. The rook has to defend g7, the queen has to defend f6, the knight on e7 has no good moves, the rook on c8 is not doing a whole lot, the king is obviously vulnerable, and white doesn't even have to win using any kind of immediate tactics. Even building up slowly is good enough here, as black just has too many weaknesses here to defend. So I realized that the position should be completely winning, and I definitely just tried to slow down a bit and not make sure not to rush it. I still had to make 10 moves before the time control, but I think I had enough time to manage. So rook e1, I think this was a good start. Now the idea is either to play rook e6, rook f6, or to harass black's queen with bishop d3 next, where black's queen won't be able to defend the f6 square for much longer. So my opponent tried rook c5. It's hard to really suggest anything else for black. I think this was maybe just the best try given the situation. I played bishop d3. Now queen takes d5 is not possible, just queen f6 and queen e7 mate. So he had to go back queen d7. Queen f3 was also a move, but here I think white has another number of winning moves. I think bishop e4 is already good enough. And after the queen moves somewhere, white plays queen f6 check, and bishop takes g6, and next move again, just taking on e7 and winning the game. So black played queen d7. I decided to play b4. Not the only move, but I figured this move is certainly good enough. Rook takes d5 is met with bishop c4, or rook takes e7, also very possible, and then just queen takes d5. So he went rook c7. I gave check, king e8, and rook e6. Now the threat is to take on g6. Black will have to play king to d8, and then rook takes d6. Just wins the queen and wins the game. So black played queen a4. Probably the only move to keep the game going, hoping to run with the king to the queen side. But white just has too many pieces in the attack, so it's not surprising that it doesn't really work out. Apparently the strongest move here was bishop e5. This was something like plus 10, which I didn't consider at all, to be honest. I didn't even see the idea. After taking, white goes d6 and simply taking on e7 with check, and then mating soon. So yeah, I mean, at this point I was honestly just so happy not to be down a piece, only down an exchange with a ton of attacking chances. Somehow it didn't really cross my mind to keep sacrificing material. Rather, I just wanted to use what I had and just win the game in a straightforward fashion. So I started with the move king h2 here. I think this is a pretty simple prophylactic move, just getting out of the way of queen d1 check. Now if black plays queen d1, then of course it's not with tempo, and white has more options here. I think I was either going to play bishop b5 check, or taking on g6 first, and then rook takes d6 with check. And probably in both scenarios, white is just winning. Instead, black played king d8 first, which I think is an interesting try. Now he's kind of hoping for rook takes d6, king c8, and at least the king is going to be finding some shelter on b7. And I actually was worried that I might be letting the advantage slip if I allow something like this to happen. I mean, material-wise, white is doing perfectly fine, but it's always nice to finish off the game, if you have the initiative and you're playing for this big attack. So I tried to keep the king from getting too far away from the center, and I decided on this move, queen f7. I think this was a good choice. Now king c8 is not really possible because I'm just going to take on e7. Black played queen e8. There was a nice line here of queen d1. Then white would win with rook takes d6 check, king c8, bishop a6, king b8, and now black just has some very clear back rank problems, and white can just immediately decide the game with queen takes g8 check. Really nice resource. Knight takes rook d8 and rook takes c8 mate. So black cannot go for counterplay, has to go back queen e8. I decided finally it's time to take the pawn on d6, king c8, and I threw in a check, king b8, and yeah, I mean, for the last like 10 moves or so, I've been kind of in the conversion phase, and for most of the game I've been mainly focusing on trying to keep the queens on the board and avoiding the queen trade. But here, actually, okay, a couple of moves ago, I finally realized that I have enough material to potentially go for some endgame, where if my two bishops are really active, then it's probably going to be really effective. And I realized actually it's just a golden opportunity to take the game into the endgame, but keeping the initiative very much alive. Especially after this move, rook e6, I've opened up threats of bishop e5 as well as d6, because this knight is pinned. Bishop b5 is also an idea, and black is just losing at least the knight here and probably more after that. And with two bishops against the rook, it's just going to be a very easy win. So black tried rook c2. There's really nothing to suggest at this point. I threw in the check, king a8. Now I think d6 is perfectly fine and should be winning for white. I decided to play bishop b5. I thought this was a nice way to finish the game. My main point was that after a move like rook d8, let's say, I can take on e7, and if rook takes d5, we have a nice mate with rook e8 check and rook b8. So with this line in mind, I think black is just lost. He tried rook f8, threatening the pawn in f2, but it's not hard to see that the two rooks on the second rank here won't be leading to anything except a couple of checks. There's no perpetual, there's no mate, and white is perfectly safe here. So I took on e7, rook takes f2 was played. Now king h3 was perfectly fine. If black gives a check, then king g4, and the king is just escaping. And if black tries h5 first to set up a mate, then white is mating first with rook e8, and again we have this rook b8 mate. Or even bishop c6 is also good enough, because black will have to give back one of the rooks for the bishop. So king h3 was fine. I played king g1, which is also winning. The only move that wouldn't win, of course, is king h1, where after rook c1 check, black is actually mating, but obviously this is very unlikely to happen. So I decided to play king g1. It's always hard to choose when you have two moves that are completely winning and you're not sure which one of them is exactly more accurate, but okay, it really didn't matter at the end. Rook g2 check, king f1, rook h2 was played, threatening a mate, but fortunately white is in time first, rook e8, and here my opponent resigned in view of rook b8 next. So yeah, on the surface I feel like this looks like a really nice game. It had this kind of slow build up, and then some nice tactics with knight takes f6 and knight takes f7 and queen g4. Followed by this eventual rook sacrifice with rook takes f6 and c4. But to be honest, I was struggling for the first part of the game. I really wasn't sure how to play the position correctly, and I felt like even the sacrifice was kind of unnecessary, because I had this much simpler option with queen f3, which would have probably been just as effective, but much less riskier. Okay, the sacrifice turned out to be correct, and everything was fine, but this would have been, yeah, a much easier move to play. In any event, this put me on 3 out of 4, doing pretty well in the tournament, and yeah, in the next round, once again, I would be playing another GM and playing up. So until then, I'll see you guys in the future videos. Take care.